If you own a business, you might be wondering, how much is this corporation actually worth? It's a really interesting question, and it's a lot more complicated than you might think it is. So let's dive right into it and see this thing you've been building, how much is actually going to net you when you go to sell. To start out, we actually have to understand, what do I mean when I'm saying selling a business? And the easiest way to think about this is in terms of the stock market. Because what the stock market actually is you take a really large company, like let's say Apple, break it into 1 million pieces, and you are selling pieces of that company. That's what a stock is. When you buy a share of Apple stock, you are buying a small piece of that company. And if you have enough shares of Apple stock, that means that you can do things like control who's on the board of directors and make some of these bigger decisions for the company. Why do people invest in stocks? And the answer is because over time, stocks tend to go up and people want a return on their investments. That's what we call ROI. Apple is a pretty large, pretty stable company. People are willing to pay a lot of money for a piece of Apple stock. But when they come to you and you're selling your small, let's say a family business, then it's very important that you understand that investors are going to expect a higher return for that additional risk that they're taking on. To do this, we're going to take the example of a family pizza shop, and we're going to run through how to actually think about the value of the company. The first mindset shift that you have to make is thinking about the owner. Let's say that you have one pizza shop where it is 100% owned and run by one guy. Okay, his name is Tim. Tim is the owner of this family-owned pizza restaurant, and Tim does everything. He wakes up early in the morning to make the dough. He is the receptionist. He takes calls. He sends pizzas out for delivery. Tim does 100% of everything. Maybe you make $1 million in sales, and of that, Tim makes $100,000 in profit because he has to pay for rent and utilities and the cost of making the pizzas. And that $100,000 is what Tim is getting paid. Now, let's have another example of the same exact pizza restaurant. This pizza restaurant, the owner is completely uninvolved. They check up on the business maybe once every quarter just to see how things are doing. But the owner, if they're not present, things are still going to go perfectly well and the business is going to run. And in this case, you have the same business with $1 million of sales and $100,000 of profit. Now, this is going to be more difficult because you have to pay for employees out of this $1 million of sale. But with these same metrics, but no owner presence, this business is going to sell for somewhere in the range of maybe 10 or 20 times as much as Tim's Pizza restaurant. And the reason for that is when you sell a company as the owner, the person coming in, they're not looking to buy a job. Again, they're looking to get a return on their investment. When they look at companies, they are valuing companies in terms of, if I have to hire somebody to do all of the work inside of the company, and I'm not involved at all or very minimally involved, then what is this company going to do? If the sales of the company and the growth of the company and the operations of the company are all reliant on one person who isn't going to be there once the business sells, then the business might not be worth anything. I would say in this case, there's a decent chance that this pizza shop is worth $0. All it's worth is, whatever you're going to sell the equipment in the store for. This store, on the other hand, might be worth $500,000 to $1 million. Because I can come in as an investor and I can say, okay, I can buy this for, let's say, $500,000, and I don't have to touch anything, and I'm going to get $100,000 a year in profits coming to me. Whenever you're valuing a business, you have to value it, take the owner out, and imagine what happens to this business if the owner disappears. And that is how you're valuing a business. Now, once you take the owner out and say, okay, we take the owner out and assume that this business is still going to operate, it's set up in a very efficient way, there are employees who have the knowledge capital to be able to continue working, then let's take a look at this company and see what is it actually going to be worth to me? And there are a few big things that investors are going to be looking for. The first one is growth. Why that's important to investors is because generally if you have a company that isn't growing, it's not doing very well. And there are usually underlying problems in the business model. More growth is always going to mean that your business is going to sell for more than cash flow or profitability. This might go without saying, but a business who has a higher amount of profitability, so let's say they have a 20 or 30% margin instead of a 5 or 10% margin, is going to be a lot more attractive to investors, and it's going to sell for more. And a big thing a lot of people don't consider is risk. When you look at this business, okay, it might be growing and it might be profitable, but what if it isn't next year? These risks range all sorts of things. One of the biggest risks is, like I said, what happens when the owner steps away? Are the clients going to leave with the owner, or are they going to stay? That's a risk, and it makes buyers nervous. Other risks to think about are things like market risk. So if the economy tanks, is your business still going to do well? Or is it going to be in the hole? There are also things like legislative risk. Let's say you work in an industry like cannabis, and you might have a very high growth, high profitability company, but the legislature of the state that you're in might mandate you out of existence in the next 6 months. These are all risk factors that are going to be considered when buying your business. So if you have more growth, more profitability, and less risk, then you are going to sell for more. And then you might be thinking, okay, so practically, what does that actually mean? How do companies go ahead and look for this? So the easiest way to think about it is in terms of multiples. Now, I'm a financial planner, and I'm pretty familiar with how the financial planning industry values businesses. I know that financial planning firms sell for a multiple of revenue between usually 1 and somewhere around 4. Let's say I have a company that makes $1 million per year in gross sales. In the financial planning space, that company is going to sell for anywhere between, on the low end, 1 million, and on the high end, 4 million. And what's going to determine where you are in this range is exactly what we talked about before. Let's say you have a company that is earning $1 million a year, but it's pretty dependent on the owner, it's pretty risky, there's not recurring revenue, maybe the company has been shrinking instead of growing, maybe your profit margin's only 10 or 15%, you're probably going to sell closer to the $1 million range. And let's say you're a big company, super stable, the owner isn't even involved, you're growing, you have these channels that clients come in through, that's where you're going to command closer to the $4 million mark. This is generally how businesses are going to be valued. So if you want to see, okay, about how much is my business worth, okay, you're going to have to go find out what is the range of multiples that your kind of business sells for. And then you have to determine, usually with a valuation professional, where your business is actually going to fall within those. And the results might just surprise you. So now you know all of the core tenets of valuing a business, and you know how to think about your business in a way that can make it more valuable to a prospective buyer. If this was helpful to you and you're thinking about selling your business, go ahead and give me a call. My contact information is in the description, and let's help you work on maximizing that value.